My name is Karl Guyton II, and tonight I will be presenting to you on amphibians and reptiles, the real canaries in coal mines. Like I said, I'm a third-year master's student at Howard University, and I'm also an intern at the Smithsonian National Zoological Park. So for my thesis research, I'm studying the behavior of the Chinese water dragon, pictured here, which is a species that we have on display at the zoo. And for my internship, I studied the behavior of our Cuban crocodiles, investigating adult Cuban crocodile responses to hatchling calls. And I'm also part of a research team assessing the health of captive Cuban crocodiles at a breeding facility in Cuba. So here's a picture of me doing some of my research activities. In the top left, I'm labeling blood slides that we took from adult Cuban crocodiles at the breeding facility in Cuba. And the bottom left, I'm holding two hatchling Cuban crocodiles from the same breeding facility. And the top right picture is me all sweaty from collecting eggs from the National Zoo from our Cuban crocodile nests. And those are some of the eggs pictured below there. So what really got me started being interested in herpetofauna, but more specifically just animals in general, was this book called The Encyclopedia of Awesome Animals. And crocodiles have always been my favorite group of animals, and I attribute a lot of that to this book. I got this book when I was about 5 or 6 years old from a store called Zany Brainy, and it was the first time I had ever seen the animal called Sarcosuchus, which is this big crocodile you see on the top picture eating a dinosaur. And to see a crocodile eating a dinosaur just blew my mind as a 5 or 6 year old child. And then if you look at some of the other species of crocodilians that we have even alive today, in the bottom picture you have a Nile crocodile eating wildebeest. That was just incredibly amazing to me. But one of the things that really stood out to me and was most fascinating to me was the behaviors that crocodilians exhibited. For example, the baby crocodiles, whenever they hatch from their eggs, they make a squeaking sound that sounds similar to this, meow, 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 meow. And that alerts the mom or both parents in some cases that the eggs are hatching, and the parents will go and open up the nests and then carry the babies in their mouth, as you see in the bottom right picture, down to the water. And most species of crocodilians will actually take care of their babies for at least some period of time. And then the adults also have complex vocalizations and behaviors that they display to each other, such as blowing bubbles, making loud noises, and doing what's called a jaw slap, where they open and close their mouths very forcefully on the surface of the water. So what is herpetology, and why are reptiles and amphibians grouped together? So if you look at these two pictures I took, the left picture is a Florida cottonmouth crossing a road here in Southwest Georgia. And the picture on the right is a Bella Vista toad that I took in Santa Fe, Argentina. And if you just look at these two pictures, you might not really see why the one left reptile and the one on the right, an amphibian, would be grouped together. But herpetology is based on the Greek root herpeton, which means creeping or crawling animal. And from that perspective, you can kind of start to understand why reptiles and amphibians are grouped together, because they both kind of have a creepy, crawly mode of locomotion, and a lot of people also consider them kind of creepy. So what are bioindicators? Bioindicators are species whose function, population, or status can provide qualitative information on the health of their environment. And the ways in which these bioindicators provide this information varies by taxa, and we'll get into a little bit of that going forward. Pictured here is a southern gray tree frog that I photographed in the mountains of northern Georgia. So the first group that I want to talk about as bioindicators are frogs and toads. Frogs and toads are generally classified as very good candidates to be bioindicators because of their sensitivity to changing environments. Frogs and toads breathe partially through their skin. And so that makes them incredibly susceptible to environmental changes such as pH changes, temperature changes, and pollution and things like that. In a lot of cases, disturbed habitats will be indicated by frogs and toads that have physical deformities. Salamanders are very similar to frogs in that aspect, in the fact that they also primarily breathe through their skin. There is a family of salamanders here in the United States called the Plethodontidae family that are completely lungless. And this black-bellied salamander in the bottom right corner is an example of one such salamander. And so these guys breathe almost entirely through their skin. So they're also very susceptible to chemical, pH, and water temperature changes. Salamanders and frogs and toads can be readily found on rainy nights, especially during the spring and summer. That's primarily whenever they're breeding. So the two left pictures, the three-line salamander and the eastern tiger salamander, I found those going out road cruising with my professor, Dr. Tom Lorenz, one night. And we helped probably about 100 or so individuals cross the road that night as they were moving between ponds to find mates. So this group of animals is very peculiar. Not a lot of people have ever heard of these. So this is another group of amphibians called Sicilians. And I had actually never heard of a Sicilian until I started taking college classes. But they're a very enigmatic group of animals. They have a cryptic lifestyle because they live underground, and that's known as fossorial. And they're typically found in the tropics of South and Central America, Africa, and South Asia. They also breathe through their skin, and because of their fossorial lifestyle, they could possibly also be good indicators of habitats that are disturbed in some way. So if we switch over to reptiles, they're generally regarded as being much more rugged and resilient than amphibians are, but still they're not immune to negative habitat alterations. Gopher tortoises, which are endemic to the southeastern United States, are adapted to old growth longleaf pine forests, and habitat loss is the main force that threatens their existence. And these tortoises are very critical to their environment. So pictured here is me with my professor, Dr. Tom Lorenz again, and we're surveying in the Flint River in Georgia, not to be confused with the Flint River in Michigan. And the turtles that we have here are called Barber's map turtles. And what's really interesting about these turtles is that they're endemic to the Flint, Apalachicola, and Chattahoochee rivers that run in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And they're mostly found in the Flint River. That means that's the only place in the world where you can find this species of turtle. So it's really cool for us to go out sampling and find several of these juvenile map turtles, which is a good indication that the populations are doing relatively well. One of the really interesting, cool things I like about Barber's map turtles is that the males and the young individuals have really sharp spines on the backs of their shells. The females generally tend to lose these sharp spines, but they make up for it by being really big compared to the males. Some of these females can get to almost the size of basketballs.
Hey, Carl, we got a couple questions real quick, if you wouldn't mind going to that last slide.
Okay.
First off, what is that interesting helmet with the camera that you're wearing in there?
So that is, it's a face covering snorkeling mask. Okay. And the apparatus at the top there is kind of the traditional snorkel hose.
All right.
So
very interesting.
It's designed to be, well, one, it supports a GoPro mount on there, which I have the GoPro mounted on there, but also it completely covers your face, so it blocks debris and stuff, and it also works to decloud your vision.
And then we have one other question, and that is for, I'm pretty sure the last slide, what is the role of the gopher tortoises in the longleaf pine environment?
So I actually have another slide dedicated completely to that. So should I answer that now or wait till we
We'll
get to
wait
that
till
slide?
the slide that's dedicated to it.
Okay,
Great, thank you. That's it
you're
for
welcome.
now.
So moving on to reptiles as bioindicators. Snakes and lizards are pretty well known reptiles, but amphibians are relatively unknown, similar to Sicilians. Amphibians are also known as worm lizards, but they are completely legless. So many snakes and lizards serve as both predators and prey in their communities, and snakes are also really great at controlling rodent populations, which vector diseases that can be detrimental to human populations. Some species are also adapted to particular environments. Thus, their presence or absence is an indication of the health of the environment. Southern hognose and eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are two such examples that are particularly adapted to longleaf pine forests, similarly to the gopher tortoise. Then crocodilians, they are the largest of the living reptiles, and typically inhabiting wetland ecosystems in the tropics, subtropics, and temperate regions of the United States, which is home to the American alligator, and in China, which houses the Chinese alligator. And crocodilians are particularly susceptible to climate change and habitat loss. In particular, two ways that habitat loss could affect crocodilians is one, their eggs have what is known as temperature-dependent sex determination. So the temperature of the nest dictates whether or not the embryos hatch out as male or females. And then the other aspect from climate change has to do with rising sea levels and flooding, which could potentially wipe away favorable nesting grounds. Then the last group of reptiles is the tuatara. This is another group of herpetofauna that is not very well known among the public. Despite its outward appearance, it is actually not a lizard and is not closely related to lizards. Tuataras are endemic to New Zealand, and they're primarily threatened by invasive species such as rats and cats. There have been reintroduction programs to place tuataras back on islands that don't have as many rats and cats, and on these islands, you see healthy tuatara populations. So herpetofauna are quite diverse. At the Smithsonian National Zoo, we have a plethora of different reptiles and amphibians. So going from the top left, we have the Panamanian golden frog. Unfortunately, Panamanian golden frogs are considered to be extinct in the wild. They are severely afflicted by chytrid fungus. And so probably right now, the only place that you'd be able to see them is in zoos. Below the Panamanian golden frog is the Philippine crocodile. This species is the rarest of all the crocodilians. There's probably only about 200 left in the wild. Next to that is the Central American bushmaster. These guys are very interesting in the fact that they're the longest venomous snakes in North America, so they're also the only vipers that lay eggs in North America. All of our other vipers, so like our rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, and copperheads, they give live birth. So bushmasters are unique in that sense. Next to that is the Japanese giant salamander. This is one of the largest salamanders in the world. They can grow to about 4 feet. And then above that is the Chinese water dragon, which is the lizard that I'm studying for my master's thesis. So if we look at the biodiversity in reptiles, there are about 10,500 species. Squamates comprise the vast majority of that with 10,200 species. Lizards have about 6,000 species. Snakes about 3,600. And amphibians, the worm lizards, have about 180 species. Turtles and tortoises comprise the second largest group with about 350 species. Crocodilians are a relatively small group in comparison to turtles and squamates. There's only about 26 recognized species across 3 different families: the Crocodilidae, which are your true crocodiles; Alligatoridae, which are your alligators and caiman; and Gavialidae is the smallest family with just 2 species, the Tomistoma and the Indian gharial. For your amphibians, there are approximately 8,000 species, of which 90% are frogs and toads, so about 6,300 species of frogs and toads. There are more than 700 known species of salamander, and more than 150 of those species are native to North America. And the largest salamander in the world is the Chinese giant salamander, which can reach sizes of nearly 2 meters, which is approximately 6 feet. This to me is one of the really cool things about living in the United States, in particular on the East Coast, is that we have the greatest salamander diversity in the entire world. So in the Appalachian Mountain region, we have, like I said, the greatest diversity of salamanders anywhere in the world. And a lot of these species are endemic to this region. So that means that they're only found in this region of the world. Some of these species are confined to just single mountains or very small regions. And I have 2 such examples here, pictured here. So this large picture here on the right is the Pigeon Mountain salamander that I photographed at Pigeon Mountain in North Georgia. So it's only found on this one mountain in North Georgia. And then on the bottom left, if you look at B, that is a newly discovered hickory nut gorge green salamander, which was just discovered last year. And it's only found in the Hickory Nut Gorge region of North Carolina. So I think that's really cool that we have such a great diversity of salamanders here on the East Coast of the United States in the Appalachian Mountain region. And like there's nowhere else in the world that you can see a lot of these species of salamanders. And then the last group of amphibians is the Sicilians, which are represented by about 220 species worldwide. So if we look at herpetofauna as keystone species and ecosystem engineers, one of the greatest examples of that here in the southeastern United States is the gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises count as both keystone species and ecosystem engineers. So keystone species is a species which has a disproportionately large effect on maintaining the ecological community relative to its abundance. And an ecosystem engineer is any organism that creates, significantly modifies, maintains, or destroys a habitat such that they have a large impact on the species richness and landscape level heterogeneity of an area. What that all means is that keystone species and ecosystem engineers are critical components of their ecosystem, and without them, many other species would not be able to survive. And the way that gopher tortoises do this in their ecosystems is by digging burrows. So in the longleaf pine forests, gopher tortoise burrows provide refuge for more than 360 species of other animals. And then they also, as they're moving through the forest and browsing, they also create paths that make traversing through the forest easier for a lot of other species of animals. They also serve as keystone species and ecosystem engineers. For many of the species, they are integral members of their communities. American alligators in the Everglades, for example, dig what are known as gator holes. And these gator holes basically collect pools of water during the dry season. And these pools of water provide homes, breeding areas, and hunting grounds to numerous other species of animals. Nile crocodiles, mugger crocodiles, and Cuban crocodiles also dig burrows during the dry season to avoid sweltering heat, and these burrows are occupied by several other species of animals. And pictured here is a mugger crocodile burrow that I photographed when I was in India last year. In Cuba, the critically endangered Cuban rock iguana recycled the nests of Cuban crocodiles after the Cuban crocodile eggs have hatched, so the Cuban rock iguanas can lay their own eggs.
Hey, Carl, we have one quick question back about the salamanders. Just with all the diversity here, we're wondering, They're sometimes hard to find. How can we see them? They're common but rarely seen.
Yeah, so salamanders are much more cryptic than frogs and toads are. The best time to see them is, like I said, on rainy nights during the spring and summer. But I know a lot of people don't want to go out at night in the rain. So if you don't want to do that, the best time and place to look for them is in damp wooded areas during the daytime. They're generally going to be found in places that are kind of dark and damp.
All right. That's it for now. So I'll let you know if we have any others.
All right. Crocodilians also serve as apex predators in their communities and ecosystems, and they are top-down regulators. And what a top-down regulator is, that means that not only do they control the prey populations of all the organisms that are trophically below them, but they also control populations of other predators, sometimes including their own species. Most species of crocodilians are generalist predators. That means that they eat a wide variety of prey. So from birth to adulthood, they can consume anything from small macroinvertebrates such as crickets and crayfish to large animals such as antelope, gazelle, buffalo, and things like that. Nile and saltwater crocodiles are probably the best known crocodilian apex predators. But here in the southeastern United States, we also have two species, the American crocodile and American alligator, both pictured here. The American crocodile is the individual with its snout lifted out of the water. You can tell American crocodiles apart from American alligators based on the shape of their snout. So American crocodiles generally have a more pointed V-shaped snout, whereas American alligators generally have a broader, more U-shaped snout. Also, American crocodile or crocodiles in general, their top and bottom jaws are the same width. And so you can see top and bottom rows of teeth whenever the mouth is closed. With alligators, the bottom jaw is narrower than the top jaw. So the bottom teeth sit in sockets inside the top jaw. So you can generally only see the top rows of teeth when the mouth is closed on alligators. Crocodilians also serve as scavengers. And this is important for several reasons, but one in particular is that it can be helpful in mitigating the spread of disease. So in sub-Saharan Africa, you often get anthrax outbreaks, which kill large herbivores, including hippos and elephants. So in this picture here, an elephant has succumbed to anthrax. And crocodiles, along with vultures, are part of the cleanup crew that dispose of these carcasses, preventing the further spread of anthrax, but they're actually immune to the effects of it, so they don't get sick or die from it, which is really interesting and cool. So unfortunately, there are several things that are threatening a lot of our herpetofauna diversity. Habitat destruction, which includes deforestation, agriculture, habitat fragmentation. These are all things that negatively affect herpetofauna roads. As you can see in the bottom left picture, an American crocodile was killed on a roadway in the Everglades. Illegal harvesting and poaching is a severe threat to a lot of herpetofauna. Tortoises in particular are especially susceptible to this. Pictured in the top right was an attempted smuggling of critically endangered radiated tortoises from Madagascar. Several funguses afflict herps. So for amphibians, chytrid fungus is one of the main funguses that afflicts them. B-sal is another one that afflicts mainly salamanders. And then snake fungal disease is very prevalent here in the United States, harming a lot of our native species. So timber rattlesnakes, rat snakes, things like that are succumbing to the effects of snake fungal disease. climate change is a very big topic of concern for reptiles and amphibians, especially because they're cold-blooded, so they depend on external factors to regulate their body temperature. And then human-wildlife conflict goes into climate change, habitat destruction, and illegal harvesting and poaching. So a lot of these have several layers of overlap.
Hey, Carl, we have a couple quick questions. So
Okay.
speaking of biodiversity, what makes the Southern Appalachians a hotspot for salamanders?
So one of the most interesting things about the Southern Appalachians in respect to the salamander biodiversity is that scientists believe that one family of salamanders in particular, the plethodonid salamanders, actually evolved there. So that's the evolutionary starting point for the vast majority of those salamander species. And so also what happens then is whenever they move across mountains, going up a mountain is generally very easy for them. But once they acclimate to those temperatures and things like that, moving down the mountain is very difficult again. And so you'll get evolutionary radiation points where that particular individual species will evolve on just that mountain range. And then you'll have another species evolving completely separately on another mountain range. And so that's why we have these high levels of species endemism, or species that are found in these very remote and small regions, that contributes to that high biodiversity.
That is very cool. And then we also have two questions on climate change. The
Mm-hmm.
first is, are there any herps that seem to be thriving with climate change?
Right now, we haven't found any that are necessarily thriving, although there is an interesting hypothesis that crocodilians might be able to expand their range due to climate change.
All right. And then the other question is, with climate change seeming to increase temperature and precipitation on the East Coast, could that be beneficial to amphibians and other herps?
It can be beneficial. It can also be, so it would be beneficial in the sense that especially during their breeding seasons, they breed in what are called ephemeral ponds. So these are temporary ponds that pop up from rain showers. So if you get more rain, they obviously have more opportunities to breed. On the flip side of that, though, is their mating seasons are obviously fixed times of the year. And so if they're moving between breeding ponds, that makes them more susceptible to being roadkill if they have to cross roads.
That makes sense.
So the increase in rain itself can be good, but the other factors that they might have to deal with could potentially be negative effects on them.
All right, very interesting. And then one more question actually related to human wildlife conflict in the bin of tortoises up there. So for a situation like those tortoises, what would happen to them if they are found? Are they usually able to be reintroduced? Our person asking the question has said that turtles and tortoises don't do well outside their own area.
Yes, so luckily, in the case of this particular instance, these tortoises were found before they were smuggled out of Madagascar at the airport. And so these individuals were likely returned back to their home range. They were probably tagged and marked as well to try and keep up with them. But generally, if they make it out of their country of origin, sometimes it's difficult to return them back. And so what would happen there is they might be donated to a zoo or a sanctuary or something like that. But yeah, they don't do well outside of their range. And it's typically what happens is they're harvested and then sold off to foreign markets for either foods or traditional medicines or things like that.
Um, so we just had another question just came in, and it's about the crocodile's immune system
Hmm.
and what is in it that provides a line of defense against anthrax bacterium.
So we don't know exactly what it is. Crocodilians, their immune systems are fascinating on a ton of different levels. One thing is that they have the strongest stomach acid in the entire animal kingdom. So that helps them in breaking down pretty much everything that they eat. So like a lot of large predators can't digest things like bones and hooves, but crocodilians, their stomach acid, because it's so strong, pretty much digest everything. So that could possibly be one of the contributing factors, is that that stomach acid is just so strong that not even anthrax can survive in there. So on the flip side of what hurts herpetofauna, they provide great value both to the ecosystem but also to humans. Um, One of the coolest things I find is using venom as a medicine. So a lot of people aren't aware of this, but copperhead venom, which are venomous snakes native to the eastern United States, is actually being used to treat breast cancer. So the protein that's found in copperhead venom is called contortrostatin, and that is one of the proteins in that venom that has been shown to inhibit the growth of tumors and help prevent metastasis in mice and hopefully be used in human breast cancer cells. As I mentioned earlier before, they're also pest control agents. So they control the populations of mice and rats, which can vector diseases for humans, and also kind of indirectly control the populations of ticks, which can also vector diseases, particularly Lyme disease, which is something that we don't want to get. Crocodile blood is also being looked at as a potential medicine. I think just last year, um, there was a study published on the effects of crocodile blood being used to potentially be a treatment for HIV and AIDS. Um, Large reptiles and amphibians are also very good for attracting for ecotourism and zoos and wildlife sanctuaries. A lot of species are visually appealing, and that also ties into their reference in art and culture. And then just their intrinsic value. They're a part of the natural world and part of our ecosystems, and so just them existing gives them value. And then also the circle of life. They serve as food for other animals. They are predators, and they help keep the ecosystem in balance. So like I said, artwork and culture is kind of a big driving force in how they serve to be valuable. Um, in my life in particular, my love of herbs also spills into my love of art. So these are all pieces that I have done or are working on currently. So I painted this crocodile skull, an Indian gharial, one of our Cuban crocodiles at the zoo. I'm working on a painting of a timber rattlesnake, and I painted a plate of Sarcosuchus a year and a half ago. So, and beyond just my own artwork, you can see references to reptiles and amphibians across a vast variety of different cultures and religions all across the world. One of the really cool things that I have gotten to do so far in my young career is herp outreach. And that is just going and talking to people from the ages of preschool kids all the way up to adults about the amazing nature of reptiles and amphibians and how they're important to the environments in our daily lives. And it's just something that I'm really passionate about and I've had a lot of fun doing. The picture in the top left, we were I was working at an aquarium back home, and we were doing an outreach program where we were reading a story to some preschool kids called "There's an Alligator Under My Bed," and so I dressed up as an alligator while my coworker was reading the story, and we kind of acted out the book. And I also brought along one of our alligators so I could also give the kids hands-on experience with the alligators and teach them about alligators and how they're important to our environments and how you can safely interact with them without causing harm to yourself or to them. I did another outreach program at another school, and you can see some of the kids wanted to pet an alligator, so I let the kids pet me for a little bit. And then in the middle picture there, I'm doing an outreach program at a preschool talking to the kids about snakes. Snakes often get a bad rap in a lot of communities across the world. And so this was a great opportunity for me to explain to the kids how snakes aren't malicious. They don't really want to hurt us. They just, want to be left alone and go out and do their thing. And so it was really cool for the kids to actually get to see a real live snake up close and in person and get to interact with it. And then on the picture in the bottom right, there was a collaboration event between my aquarium and the local zoo where we were actually doing what was called Rivers Alive. And that's where we would go out and we'd do river cleanup. And then we'd come back and we'd have like an outreach program where we would handle some of the animals from the aquarium and the zoo. And that was really fun and educational.
So, Carl, we have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
So the first is it's about the poison found in dart frogs. The background is that an ornithologist studying birds in New Guinea discovered a poison in the skin of a local bird species that was nearly identical to the poison found in South American dart frogs. And we're wondering how the substance used in defense could be found on opposite ends of the planet.
Yeah, so that probably goes into this really cool phenomena called convergent evolution. And so what convergent evolution is two separate groups of organisms, sometimes close related, sometimes fairly distant related, evolve similar mechanisms. So for example, bats flying and birds flying. They evolved these things totally separately, but they evolved very similar mechanisms of flight. And so that is possibly what's at play there, is that you've got these birds coming evolutionarily to a very similar mechanism of producing a toxin as these frogs in South America.
Wow, that is really cool. Then another question is about the research center in Cuba. Is it possible to visit it?
Yes, you can visit it. They are open to the public. It is, let's see, it's probably about a 2-hour drive from Havana to Zapata, where the breeding facility is. But yes, visitors to the public is allowed.
All right.
And I would highly recommend you visit if you are ever in Cuba.
Okay. At the moment, that is it for questions.
Okay. And so that's actually a great question to lead into, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about my work at the breeding facility in Cuba. So 3 of these pictures here, the bottom left, this top picture, this top right picture, and this bottom right picture were all taken at the breeding facility in Cuba. Um, sorry. These 2 crocodiles are actually breeding adults, and this was actually a wild juvenile that actually swam into the breeding facility. So the breeding facility is actually connected to the swamp where the Cuban crocodiles are found. It's the largest breeding facility of Cuban crocodiles in the world. They have about 4,000 individuals there. Interestingly enough, the breeding facility was set up by Fidel Castro, who recognized the Cuban crocodiles as a national icon. So Cuban crocodiles, they're critically endangered. They have the smallest home range of any of the living crocodilians, so they're only found in the Zapata swamp. There have been recently reintroductions to the Isle of Youth, which is a small island off the mainland coast of Cuba, where they formerly were also native to. The 2 main threats to the Cuban crocodiles are habitat loss and hybridization with the American crocodile, which is also native to Cuba. One of the interesting things about the hybridization is that we're not entirely sure if it's a completely new thing or if it's something that has happened historically, but because of the severe population decline of Cuban crocodiles is now exacerbated. Historically, Cuban crocodiles and American crocodiles like to partition their habitats. So American crocodiles generally prefer to be on the coast in the more brackish waters, and Cuban crocodiles generally prefer to stay inland in the freshwater swamps. But during colonial times, canals were dug from the coast inland to the swamps, and we believe that made the American crocodile's traversal into the swamps much easier. And so that's probably what has led to the greater increase in hybridization. The reason why hybridization is a negative effect on the Cuban crocodiles is because it disrupts the genetic integrity of the Cuban crocodiles. And because there's so many American crocodiles and so few Cuban crocodiles, the reduction in purebred crocodiles could potentially lead to the complete decimation of pure wild type, pure Cuban crocodiles. So one of the things that we do in our studies at the breeding facility there is we're doing health assessments on the adult Cuban crocodiles to verify that they are indeed purebred Cuban crocodiles and make sure that they're getting all the necessary vitamins and nutrients that they need to successfully grow up and be healthy and reproduce.
So we have a couple of questions, one specifically about the Cuban alligators. And I know you just mentioned checking to see if they are pure Cuban alligators. Has anyone done research on this to see what proportion of the population is pure Cuban alligator?
Yeah, so there are a couple of the scientists in Cuba that are currently doing that research now. One of the issues is that Zapata Swamp is an extremely remote region, so it's very difficult to get out there. And Cuban crocodiles are much more aggressive than most of the other species. And so it makes collecting data on them particularly difficult, but some of the researchers in Cuba are doing that research, yes.
All right. And then this other question is a little bit unrelated to the crocodiles, but related to the region. Is there any research being done on pit vipers in Central America regarding their prey-predator relationships?
I'm sure that there is. I'm not completely aware of any. One of the interesting things about some of the pit vipers in Central America is that, particularly with the pit vipers that reside in rainforests is that they have a different style of hunting their prey than you would find in pit vipers in, say, like temperate regions. So like if you look at a rattlesnake hunting its prey, what they'll do is they'll bite the prey and then quickly let go, and then use their infrared pits to track their prey and then consume it there. With a lot of more tropical pit vipers, like the bushmaster, for example, they will strike their prey and then not let it go. And kind of the hypothesis is that the damp environments might rub off the venom, and so they might have a more difficult time retracking the prey. So they just hold on to the prey the entire time and then just consume it from there.
All right, that is really cool. That is all the questions at the moment.
Okay, and that was actually my last slide. If you would like to follow me more on my journey as I go through my science, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at AfroSukia. But yeah, that's all I've got.
All right, so thank you so much, Karl. At this moment, we would like to invite the audience to ask any other questions that they would like. And you can either ask them on the chat box or use your voice to ask them.
I have one.
Thank you, Janine.
Karl, I've volunteered at the reptile house at the zoo for 14 years. I don't think anybody's still there that I would know, but who did you work with there?
I'm working with Alan Peters, Kyle Miller, Robin Saunders, Matt Evans, Matthew Neff, and Michael Miller.
Oh, Mike Miller, he was there.
I love Michael.
Now, who does the Cuban Crocs now?
Kyle. Kyle's the lead keeper with Cuban Crocs.
Awesome. As we are hearing this, there is a lot of thank yous and great feedback for you, Karl. I want to extend our gratitude for your time tonight. It was a wonderful presentation, and I will go looking for salamanders again. I am so excited.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here,
You're
Karl.
welcome.